Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Full Chat. It's Wednesday night. It's the time that we talk about Formula One, me and Alex Van Gien. And tonight we're first of all going to be talking about the whole Red Bull and Ted Kravitz saga. We'll dip into that. We're also then going to be looking at Ferrari's troubles, their performance dip at the last race. We're going to look at general high-altitude Formula One performance and why it's a little bit difficult for F1 cars to drive at high altitude and maintain the same performance. We've got the Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton Twitter spat, the rivalry, well, it's not really a rivalry, but that kind of animosity that keeps on giving. And we're also going to talk about some of the on-track incidents from Mexico. But I should probably introduce my co-host, all the way from, where are you, Wigan? It's Alex Van Gien.
I'm in Wakefield. Just a little bit below Leeds. I'm away on a training course at the moment, so I have taken all of my podcasting paraphernalia across the country just so I can have a chat with you and the internet on a Wednesday night.
Hashtag not a podcast. For those of you listening on Twitter, remember this is predominantly a YouTube live stream. We're just using Twitter basically to let you guys know that we are also doing this on YouTube. So apologies if the audio isn't as good listening on the Twitter space, and if we don't interact with you as much. If you want to chat to us, feel free to go to the YouTube channel. Link should be pinned to the top of my profile, and then you can, or be on Alex's profile as well, and then you can chat to us in the YouTube chat and ask your questions. So Alex, before we get into Formula 1 stuff, what have you been up to? What's going on in Alex's world? You obviously haven't been at football tonight, scoring 9 goals or whatever it was before.
No, not been to football tonight. So it's been, I work for a boiler manufacturer, and everything's moving over to air source heat pumps. And they are retraining us on all things air source heat pumps. So I have done 2 assessments today, and I got 100% on both of them second time round.
That sounds extremely boring. Now let me tell you what I'm doing. I am going go-karting all weekend, and it's the final.
That always sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's the final of the British Indoor Kart Championship, which is like the second best indoor championship in the UK. And so I'm going up to Manchester to do that, and then I'm going off to France for 2 weeks of testing tyres at the Goodyear test track. So that's my next couple of weeks. So a little bit of time away from home. Hi to everyone in the chat. Remember, you can just stick your messages in there, stick your chat, any of your questions. If you want us to definitely answer it, do a super chat, because we're kind of obliged to do it then. But we'll try and answer any questions you have anyway. So Alex, shall we start off with the big drama of the last couple of weeks? The Max Verstappen / Red Bull boycott of Sky Sports because of Ted Kravitz's comments, I guess over the season, or was it one particular comment that really bugged them?
It's been a bit weird. I mean, Ted was stating that Lewis was robbed at the end of last season. They were the words he used. It wasn't Red Bull or Max Verstappen that robbed Lewis last season. It was Michael Massey, and Michael Massey alone making a human error. That was the thing. But Red Bull have taken massive offence to that and decided to just not talk to Sky anymore, which is ridiculous considering they are the main broadcaster.
So did Ted actually say that... First of all, he didn't say that Red Bull robbed him, did he? He didn't say Red Bull robbed Hamilton. He was posing a hypothetical movie-type scenario where he was saying, wouldn't it be amazing if this was the storyline, essentially? And he said the person who was going to win was robbed. And by robbed, he at no point insinuates that it was Red Bull or Verstappen doing the robbing. That's why this is particularly silly. Ted was using the word robbed as people use in basically all sport. I think it's quite a common parlance to say we were robbed when you feel like an official has made a decision that's gone against you, basically. I thought it was quite clear, but it's almost like they just wanted to make a point in this situation that Max deserves, or the team deserve, more respect for their achievement.
I think it was also the thing that Ted said was he said that Max can't seem to win a championship in a normal way. And I mean, that's kind of true, because the whole mess that happened at the end of Abu Dhabi wasn't a normal way for it to happen. And this year, when he crossed the line in, Suzuka, he didn't know he'd won. So you didn't get the whole fanfare of Max Verstappen, you are world champion, that kind of stuff. So it, again, and was given to him in the post-race interview. So again, that wasn't a normal way. So Ted was only really talking facts, but Red Bull seem to like to play the victim a bit. Red Bull like to feel like they are the ones that are hard done by. But they are also the ones who have a history of dishing it out. So the old phrase of those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, I think is quite clear to Red Bull these days. So
I can see why, if you weren't really paying attention to the context of what Ted was saying in this particular... I mean, I think it's probably different situations throughout the season where he's referenced Abu Dhabi and maybe he's not referenced it in a way that Verstappen or Red Bull took a liking to. But when he said that phrase that Max doesn't seem to be able to win a championship in a normal way, he definitely wasn't saying it in a kind of mean or disrespectful way. He was just pointing out that the circumstances of both of the title-winning days have been weird, which is unquestionable. Like it's not, that's really not up for discussion. We know all of the controversy of Abu Dhabi, but also this year with the weird points, half points, or is it not half points? And we didn't even Max didn't know if he was champion until quite a while after the race had finished, and I'm sure he wasn't even sure then. It's not wrong for Ted to have said that Verstappen can't seem to win a championship in a normal way, but I really think it's been taken badly, almost because people are looking to be offended in that situation. Maybe they just really wanted to make a point of demanding a little bit more respect.
I think it's been taken badly because Red Bull have also had lots of other abuse thrown at them because of all the things going on with the cost cap at the moment. There's been a lot of accusations thrown at Red Bull before, which they implicitly denied. And then it got proved that they had been outside the cost cap. Outside the cost cap, breaching a regulation is cheating. That's just a fact of what the terminology works its way to be. And they obviously don't take it very well to be called cheats. So they've decided to take it out for some reason on the lovely Ted Crab.
So I think you're right there. I think that's really the main point, isn't it? Because they've been caught up in a number of controversies, the cost cap being a big one. I feel like maybe they feel a bit attacked because people are having a go at them from lots of different fronts, and a lot of them very justified. But I think you've probably pointed out the real thing there. They just want to kind of be left alone to enjoy their championships and not have to face up to some of the more awkward aspects of how those championships were won. We've had a super chat in from New Made. It's not actually a question, but I'm going to read it out because he's been good enough to do a super chat. New Made says Red Bull were complicit in the robbery, in inverted commas. They were the ones that fought the silly any does not mean all argument for the stewards. So actually, every time I talk about Abu Dhabi, I say, I don't really want to talk about it because it is kind of like a weird, painful memory. But it is true that Red Bull kind of spoon-fed the stewards the incorrect reasoning, which the stewards then later used to uphold the incorrect initial decision. So Red Bull kind of were the architects of some of the chaos because, they first of all called for the race just to get going again. We just need one more lap. And then they went and fought their case in the steward's office, which they have a right to do, but they fought it with false information, using that whole any doesn't mean all argument, etc. When that kind of deflected from the whole point that even if any didn't mean all, the safety car still couldn't come in until the end of the following lap. So it's kind of a moot point anyway. But yeah, we probably shouldn't retread all that. But do you have any comments before I move on?
The funny thing on the whole thing of Red Bull trying to influence the referee, I in a way don't blame Red Bull for it because they have an ability to talk to the referee. We would all do the same. If we were in that position and we had an opportunity, we would all talk to the referee and go, try this. It was the weakness of that referee who buckled under what wasn't very big pressure. So I still put a lot more of that on Massey than I do on Red Bull trying to influence, because Toto was also on the line trying to get it to make sure they followed the rules correctly. But Red Bull won out. They were more convincing.
So I still take issue with the way the stewards acted afterwards. But anyway, right. So what we know for a fact is that Red Bull have said that they've kind of finished their boycott. So they've made their point. They're going to be back on Sky this weekend. We'll probably have round the clock Christian Horner 24/7, whatever, his train of thought, stream of consciousness, directly beamed to the Sky broadcast as it normally seems, and everything will be hunky-dory again. But F1 Mia Hamm points out in the chat that there are rumours that the FIA threatened Red Bull that if they continued to boycott basically their largest broadcaster, that they'd be fined or face other repercussions.
Oh no, a fine for Red Bull. That would have such a traumatic effect. But to be fair, they only hurt themselves. If they boycott if they boycott Sky, again, one of the biggest broadcasters who shows the sport, that's bad for their sponsors. That's bad for all their partners and wouldn't give them anything. But also, who in the F1 grid is spoken to more by Sky than Christian Horner himself? So he's only affecting his own TV time.
Yeah, fully agreed. We've had another super chat, so let's read that one. It's from Deborah Hood. It says, question, read a piece that said Max stays at full race pace behind the safety car, gaining a 5-second gap whilst others back off. Should this be highlighted to the FIA? Your thoughts? So, first of all, this shouldn't be possible. I don't know where you've read that, but there's a delta that all the cars have to drive to, so it would be pretty obvious immediately to everyone, not just the officials, but the other teams, if any car was gaining 5 seconds behind full safety car, everyone's bunched up anyway. So there's no way you could drive at full pace because there's a safety car in front of you. And Max is invariably the one that's directly behind the safety car. If it's virtual safety car, there are obviously ways that you can game the system. And I've never driven to a Formula One Delta with that system, so I can't tell you exactly how it works. But you could effectively, try and take shorter lines or accelerate at certain points. Basically, I'm sure the drivers are well aware of the areas they can exploit, but I'd be surprised if there was like 5 seconds in it. So I don't think that's probably something we need to worry about too much.
You're well aware of speeding under yellows, Bradley.
Yeah, so in unpoliced, in series, race series, kart series, whatever, car series, where there is no electronic delta, then yeah, you go as fast as you possibly can under yellow flags to the point where until you get penalised.
As you said, it's all about gaming the system. With things like the deltas that they have to hold to under safety cars, is like pit lane speed limit, is like all the other things like track limits. They are actually not even like track limits actually, but like the whole thing of the pit entry, it is a specific number. If they go over that specific number, it's instantly flagged up and it's a slam dunk. It's a bit like with false starts as well.
And it's pointed out there by Arno in the chat that it was virtual safety car. He actually seems to know the exact moment that Deborah is talking about there. It was a virtual safety car, and Lewis complained that Verstappen gained 1 or 2 seconds on him. So here's a situation where this can happen, and hopefully this makes sense quite clearly. If the virtual safety car comes out when you're in a really fast section of track, say you're at the end of the long straight or approaching the end of a very fast straight, and your rival is in a very slow corner, where they'd be going, say, 40, 50 miles per hour anyway, if you spend more of your time relative to your competitor during a virtual safety car in the slow corners, you're going to lose out less than the person who's in the fast parts of the track. So if the virtual safety car ends for you when you're already in a slow corner, and it ends for your competitor in the middle of the fastest straight, your competitor will lose out to you. And that's just, there's nothing you can really do about that. That's just the nature of a virtual safety car. It's trying to make things fair, but if everyone's going the same kind of speed, then in a slow speed corner you're going to lose less time than in a high speed section of the track. They do try and get around that with these mini sectors, but it's obviously not perfect. So I think that's probably where 1 or 2 seconds I can see that happening quite
Definitely.
Easily.
Yeah, the VSC often sees people gain time or lose time based on exactly what you were just talking about. To be fair, I think what it should be is they should get a relative on their dash to the car in front of them and the car behind them, and they should have to keep that relative time the same, probably to the car in front, because then it stops. Like, for example, if you had one team member in first, one team member in third, and the second car was in between, they had to sort of drag back to keep their gap the same. So as long as you keep the gap the same to the car in front, I think that would be a more fair way of doing it, but maybe less safe, because you'd have people maybe speeding up or slowing down too much. I
think you'd then be at the mercy of the car in front getting it right, and there'd be like a horrible concertina. I think the way they're doing it now is pretty much as good as you're going to get, and I would prefer,
for safety points of views as well.
Yeah,
it is a safety today. They don't really care if someone loses or gains a second or two, because it is a safety feature.
I prefer when it's a virtual safety car to when it's a full safety car, because at least the gaps are somewhat preserved. It's totally different to when you get a car which was, say, 40 seconds ahead, and everyone's bunched up and they've lost. It's massively unfair on the people who are further ahead at that point. So I'll tell you what, let's talking about people who aren't far ahead. Let's move on to our little topic about Ferrari. And remember, guys on YouTube, you can ask a question at any time. If you want to interrupt us, if you don't like the topics we've chosen, feel free to direct this show your own way by sending us a super chat. If you're listening on Twitter, on the Twitter space, head to my YouTube channel. Just search for Brad Philpot on YouTube and you'll see we're live now. And you can join in the chat there as well. But our second item is about Ferrari and their mysterious, well, or maybe not quite so mysterious, drop in performance relative to the other top teams at Mexico. So Ferrari have generally been either the fastest or second fastest car all season, and then at Mexico we get to this high altitude circuit. There's the air is less dense, and Ferrari for some reason are way off, 30 seconds back or so from being in the lead fight. So that's quite a change. Do you have any inklings as to why this is, Alex?
I think the understanding was it was something to do with their turbos. They've got an issue running their turbos in the low density air, which you get in Mexico, running at the altitude that track is at. And I think it was just a case of Ferrari could not run their turbo as high or as powerful or as much boost as they normally do. And it obviously massively affected their performance. So
the way I understand it is with the less dense air, they have to, or everyone has to, but Ferrari in this case have to run the turbo faster to produce the same kind of effect, to generate similar amounts of power. Theirs just isn't reliable enough to run at those higher speeds that it needs to. Literally the amount of times the little fan is spinning around inside the turbo, it would be such a high rate that they would be risking it failing. And so they had to artificially restrict that, which then restricts their performance. If your competitors have reliable enough turbos that they can run at those higher speeds in the higher altitude, run the turbo faster, then they're not losing out as much. And I think we'll probably see something similar, but not as bad at Brazil, because it's not quite as
Lastronomy in the chat has said that they have the smallest turbo of all the teams, which is also another part of the reason they had to turn it all down. I didn't know that.
No, maybe I can't.
I didn't know that. I don't know if it's right, but it sounds like it's plausible.
I can't comment on whether that's factual or not, but let's go with it because we don't have any better information. We've got another super chat there asking about Ricciardo, but we are going to move on to that in a little while anyway. So we'll park that particular super chat and we'll read Built to Juz Lexus. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that name, but Built asks, did you guys ever give your opinion on whether the 10% cost cap penalty will hurt Red Bull? We didn't, and I'll tell you why we didn't, because Alex went off to some party and completely abandoned this not a podcast last week. And so we didn't really get to talk about that. So tell you what, I'll play the little super chat tune for the people on Facebook, and me and Alex can think about... Facebook. Wow, I'm so old. On YouTube. It's all
Who uses Facebook anymore, Brad?
Is that on the Google?
On the interwebs?
Anyway, so we didn't give our opinions. It's probably pretty obvious what our opinion is because we're not leaning in our impartiality. Alex and I don't lean towards Red Bull. Put it that way. If we had to choose between,
dare you accuse me of bias, Bradley? I actually have some information on this. So I do have a person on the inside at Red Bull who works within the aerodynamics department inside Red Bull. And
wait, you can't leave it like that. So you've got a spy inside Red Bull.
I have a contact of somebody that I know, and they just so happen to work at Red Bull. And the information I've had from that person is next year's car is designed. All they've got to do is put it together. All the wind tunnel, all the CFD stuff on next year's car is done. So their car is ready just to be built. And the only thing it will affect them on is a little bit of their in-season development and a little bit of next year's, of 2024's car's development. Out the box, it shouldn't hurt them at all.
So there's so much carryover nowadays anyway. The car is almost certainly going to be based largely on this year's car anyway. So 10%, and actually, it isn't actually 10%, is it? So this is something that I take a little bit of issue with.
I tried to have this conversation with this person, and they were like, nope, it's definitely 10%. I'm like, well, it's not, though.
No.
He wasn't having it.
Okay, so it's 10% of the allowance that they were going to get anyway, but it's not 10% of the total allowable wind tunnel testing budget, if you will, in terms of percentage. So you lose 30%, and feel free to correct me in the chat if I'm talking absolute rubbish here, but from what I understand, you lose 30% of the 100% potential wind tunnel time that you're allowed, like the maximum anyone's allowed. You lose 30% of that if you win the championship. And then they are losing a further 7% on top of that. So that 10% is 10% of 70%, which is 7%. Does that make sense? Alex, I know we're rubbish at maths, but that's pretty basic maths, right? So they will have 63% of the maximum possible allowed wind tunnel time. So, and the chat there is backing us up. Yeah, so 10% of 70%. Whereas when we normally say, oh, they've lost 30% wind tunnel time, we're talking about 30% out of a maximum of 100%. So that's why I take a little bit of issue, because it's not quite as big as it sounds. And when you've already got the fastest car that's kind of quite a long way down the road from your competitors anyway, and you've already done most of the design of next year's car anyway, save, performance updates through the year, which they'll still be able to do anyway, it's really not that big a penalty. And obviously we can probably set aside the financial side of things completely, because they've got no problem with money anyway, so a fine isn't an issue. So I don't really think they've been hurt at all, despite Horner's protests.
I mean, Christian Horner put 2 to 5 tenths a lap on it, which is ludicrous, because that's massive, and I just don't think it's that big. And as I said, it's going to only cost them in the development race, and if they are as far ahead now going into the new season as they are, if they go into the new season as far ahead as they are now, them losing a little bit of development towards the end of the season isn't going to hurt them. It might hurt them on how they get their car out in 2024, but that's a long time away. And anybody who was involved in the cost cap breach in 2021 might not even be there anymore. So they still walk away with their plaudits of winning championships, because the penalty's been passed on to people who might be new to the business.
So F1 Blag points out something really good in the chat. F1 Blag says, cheat and win is a lower penalty than cheating and coming second, which is true, because the percentage drop is based on what you were going to get anyway. 10% penalty for someone who cheated but didn't win, they came second, is less of a penalty than someone who gets a 10% penalty and won, because you were already getting a 30% drop by winning. And so that 10% of 70% is smaller. It's the 7%, as we said. Anyway, I hate talking numbers, but basically it's a load of rubbish, isn't it? It's a nothing penalty, really. And I think in this...
It's a slap on the wrist.
It's a slap on the wrist, and I don't think it's a huge disincentive to not do it again next year. I don't even think we've heard of the FIA saying, if you do it again, it's going to be a massive penalty. I don't even think they've said that.
There's nothing to deter Mercedes or Ferrari doing it next season, from what I've heard, because they haven't been involved in any meetings. So they couldn't have said to Mercedes or Ferrari, if you do any of these things, we give you a bigger fine. They might have said something to Red Bull, and that's not come out. But to be fair, the fine doesn't bother me as much, and everything else that's gone with it. What bothers me is a team got to negotiate their penalty, which is a much bigger kettle of fish, and obviously we're not going to go into that today. But that's the thing that bugged me the most, was they got caught doing something wrong, whether they meant to or not, and I don't think I buy into that, but whether they meant to or not, they got caught doing something wrong, and they then got to negotiate their penalty. That is not right as far as...
So we were obviously a little bit derailed, because that was a question from the chat. We were talking about high altitude racing. And that's what actually I think I really love about this show, is that because of the way our listeners and viewers send us in the questions, they can really send us off on little tangents that we weren't planning to go to. And Red Bull's cost cap penalty wasn't one of the things on our list. But we spoke about Ferrari's potentially little turbo that struggles when it's up high.
The little turbo that couldn't.
Exactly. There are other issues or good things from running at altitude, depending on what your car's like. I've made a little cool picture. You can't see this if you're on Twitter, guys, but it's a Formula One car up in a mountain, because that means it's up high at lots of altitude. So obviously there's a reduction in downforce. So we've said power, they're losing power, there's a reduction in downforce, but there's also a reduction in drag. So if your car's main deficit to its rivals, or one of its big ones, is that it's very draggy, then you can potentially move yourself closer to the front. And I think the combination of that and them being allowed to run their turbo how it should be, or at least closer to how they'd like to, those things combine to bring Mercedes closer to the front at Mexico. Do we think they're going to maintain that at Brazil?
I don't know. I know Brazil's quite high. You know, if you think of somewhere like Silverstone, which is basically at sea level. And do we know the height of Mexico?
Nope.
It's something ridiculous. It's ridiculously high. I think it's like higher than Ben Nevis. Anyway, but Brazil is less high than Mexico, but still quite high. So hopefully it will help Mercedes, because they ran very, very well there last year. Whether that's anything to go by with today's cars, we don't know. It is a smooth circuit, but it's a power circuit. And obviously power circuits have massively favoured Red Bull this year because of their incredible ability to run lots of downforce and have very little drag, which is like the perfect thing that you want on any racing car. And that's what Mercedes have not been able to achieve. If it has a similar effect, I think we can see Mercedes in a similar position. Is Mercedes going to get that elusive win? I just don't see anybody overhauling Max in that Red Bull at the moment, unfortunately.
So F1 Blag says Mexico 7,000 feet above sea level, Brazil 3,000 feet. They did write in brackets, I think. So we won't take that as the completely accurate figure. But so it's still pretty high, but about half, just under half the altitude. We had a comment from Lastronomy. And Lastronomy says, in Mercedes debrief, they said the upgrade introduced at COTA is working well and definitely brought them closer, but they won't be as close as in Mexico. And I also heard James Vowles saying this on the Mercedes debrief, where he said that when they're running in their high downforce package, that's when it works the best. That won't be what they're running at Brazil. I don't know why it won't. I guess because there's not that many high-speed corners. A lot of the corners in the middle of the track. I mean, it's a short track anyway. But you've got that long drag down to turn one. So the really, really long is that Glock corner all the way to turn one is quite a high-speed section. So I guess you want lower downforce, less drag. And then most of the rest of the track, you've kind of got turn 1 and 2 isn't really high downforce, is it? It's very slow. That little, is it the Senna S? Is that what that's called?
It's a third gear corner, braking downhill. And you need to get the stability right to go through the fast left-hander onto the back straight. Then you do have 2 fast corners, and then you get into the midsection of the track, which is a bunch of slow, almost hairpins.
So you've prevented me from calling the corners what I would refer to them as, because I don't know what their real names are, what their Portuguese names are. But so Senna S, that's fine, I can deal with that. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the Verstappen round the outside / all the cars crashing in the rain corner. You've then got the straight, and then you've got the Verstappen driving Hamilton off the track corner.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I was talking about the one before where he was really good in the wet. You know, he was taking the karting line.
He took Rosberg round the outside.
Yeah. But that's also the corner where loads of people were spinning off in the wall. Anyway, yeah. Then you've got the pushing Hamilton off corner. You've then got was it Jarno Trulli at the side of, God, this is going to be the old, like, early 2000s F1 chat, but that's the corner where...
Was
Jarno Trulli taken out?
Suttil.
And they were having an argument at the side?
Corner.
Yeah, so you've got
the exit of that corner running up to the hill for the right-hander, where for about 3 weeks, for about 3 other races past that race, Jarno Trulli was coming into press conferences with photos saying that he's done it, even though all the photos showed it was entirely his fault.
And then you've got, basically... fiddly hairpin, sweepy left, fiddly hairpin, sweepy left. Then you've got the corner that Hamilton got a penalty for, but it was actually Albon just turning in on him and driving straight to the apex corner. And then is that Glock, and then that's the end of the lap. So there we go. That is the official.
I would love it if, now the fact that Massa and Glock are now besties, I would love it if they just named that corner Glock corner. It would be amazing.
So basically, what we're saying is we think Mercedes will maybe kind of be all right, but we're not sure, and definitely not as good as they were at Mexico. And if they want to win, it's going to have to be, there has to be some outside circumstance. Basically, the last few races, it's been Hamilton versus Red Bull or Hamilton versus Verstappen. If Verstappen wasn't there, Mercedes would have won a couple of races already. So it's essentially, they need something to happen to Verstappen that's bigger than the pit stop being a bit delayed for Mercedes to have a chance of winning.
See, the interesting thing is I think Mercedes have the chance of beating both Ferraris in both of the next two races and potentially Sergio Perez as well. The question that I've seen banded around the internet this week is, will Mercedes overhaul Ferrari in the points, and do they want to? Now, the points about do they want to is if they stay in third, they get more wind tunnel time than both Ferrari and Red Bull. But the engineers and stuff on the team would very much like to have second because they get bonuses. And I guarantee they're losing a lot of the bonus that they've had for the last 7 years for winning the Constructors' title, which somebody told me they were all getting 10 grand bonuses for winning the Constructors' Championship. And it's more like 2 grand if they come second or if they come second. So I assume it's even less if they come third. So you have the whole people side of it and the competition side of it.
So from everything I've heard from Mercedes, their target very much is to come second. And it's going to be difficult because it's still quite a points gap. It's going to rely on Ferrari mucking stuff up. But, you know, it's probably quite a safe bet some of the time with Ferrari. So they would rather come second and lose the wind tunnel time, is my feeling. Especially because of, as you pointed out, they're going to get more bonus for coming second. They obviously can't come first anymore, but at least they could maybe get a little bit more performance bonus. Staff, I don't even mean the Constructors' Championship money that the team would get. I just mean the staff payout is going to be better than if they come third. So I think they've got their sights set on that, but I think it's still a bit of a long shot. I don't think Ferrari are going to mess up that badly, and there are not that many races to go. Just a reminder for anyone listening.
I think the senior management who don't have to worry about 2 grand would actually probably rather have the wind tunnel time, but they have to say, there's no way in the media they're going to say, no, we don't want second. It's a bit like in Formula 2, when if you aren't guaranteed a race seat in anything for the next season, if you win the championship, you don't want to win the championship in F2. You want to just lose it and then say you lost it.
So I think you're probably right. I think the engineering team may well be looking at this situation as in the extra wind tunnel time would be nice, and it might not be quite such a bad thing if they don't nab that second position. Varun Sambi in the chat asked, when will we discuss the Red Bull boycott tantrum? We've kind of already done that, Varun, so you might just want to skip back to the start and just listen back, because we probably did that bit to death. We probably can't go over that one again. And just to remind everyone listening on the Twitter space, and we've got a few people, what is that, 65 people listening in on Twitter. You'll get a much better experience if you go to my YouTube channel, and you can see mine and Alex's pretty faces and in all their glory, and you can get involved in the chat. So apologies if we're ignoring you on Twitter. We're not approving anyone to speak, because that would mess things up somewhat in the way this is formatted technically. But thank you for listening in anyway. So Alex, we move on to our next item. We've got 5 official items, and then obviously anything you guys throw at us. Item 4 on our pre-scheduled topics is the spat, the ongoing dispute, the simmering under the surface resentment that is the relationship between Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. Do you like that picture?
I have no strong opinions on Fernando Alonso.
I just realised you can't see the picture, but it shows a really flattering picture of Alonso for the YouTube.
It'll come in eventually, because I am looking at YouTube, obviously seeing it at the same speed the YouTube people are.
So just to explain for anyone who didn't see this last week, Fernando Alonso was giving an interview to, I believe, Dutch media. It's always interviews to Dutch media, where he didn't think anyone outside of that would hear, but obviously they will, because probably someone wanted to rub Team LH's noses in it and say, look what Fernando said. And he basically said that Max's championships were worth more than Lewis's, because Lewis didn't have to fight anyone and Max has had to fight people. And you can pick that apart as many ways as you want, and you can make that sound pretty unflattering for Max if you really want to be mean. But the long and short of it is, the juicy part of this is Alonso having a dig at Lewis. After all these years, what is it? Is it 15 years since they were teammates?
15 years.
He still can't help.
Let it go, old man. Let it go.
He still can't help it.
You got your butt handed to you by a rookie, and your whole career then spiraled out of control because of that. And you have done nothing but try and throw shade on Lewis ever since then. And the thing was, up until Hungary, qualifying in Hungary 2007, I was a Fernando Alonso fan. When he decided to wait extra time that he didn't need to in the pit lane to hurt his own teammates, that made me lose all the respect that I ever had for Fernando Alonso. He is a phenomenal racing driver. However much I'd like to say he's too old and he's past it, he is a phenomenal racing driver, and you cannot deny that. But the guy has no integrity. The guy has absolutely no idea how to hold a team together. The guy does not know how to be part of a team. And I think it's absolutely childish. And he has these whole bunch of fans that he is gaslit to tell that he's the best, when he was at McLaren, saying, "Oh, if it wasn't for the chassis, he'd be. If it wasn't for the GP2 engine, he would be winning the championships." And then it was very much proved that no, actually, he still wasn't that. The car still wasn't good enough for that. And he's just so butthurt, and he can't get over it. And everyone keeps asking him questions, and rather than just sort of saying, "I respect Lewis Hamilton" in the first instance, he has a dig and then says he respects him.
So I'm going to be honest. I kind of knew what I was getting myself into by having this as one of the topics, because I know how
Of course you did.
I know how Alex feels about Fernando Alonso. So my relationship with Fernando is similar to Alex's in the beginning. I was a anyone but Schumacher fan, and Fernando emerged as the hot shot that was going to topple Schumacher, and then did, and won 2 years on the bounce, 2005 and 2006. I really liked that Renault team. I thought they did really well, because really the McLaren should have won, and it was just unreliable, but Renault brought it home. They were cool, bright yellow and blue, even though that was actually a cigarette sponsor colour. But I liked the cars. I even had a radio control car that I painted those colours. So I was on Team Fernando.
I have one of those cars as a not a Matchbox figure, but an official figurine of that car in my office.
So I'm basically in the beginning, I was definitely a Fernando fan. I also was following Hamilton through his junior career, and was really excited to see him come through F3 and GP2 and then get into Formula 1. And McLaren were going to be this awesome team that I was really excited about. I remember the Autosport cover of Alonso with very short hair and Hamilton, and anyway, it was all going to be this big thing. And we all know how that went down. We know they finished on identical points at the end of the season. Hamilton's unreliability and really a team mistake at was the Chinese Grand Prix, Shanghai, with the gravel trap incident. Yeah, we know how that went down. It's
not there anymore.
But he was so happy that Hamilton didn't win the championship. He didn't care that he also had missed out on it by 1 point.
Yeah. And the thing was, I very much feel with that season. Sorry, Brad, I didn't mean to cut over you. I very much feel with that season as well. If Alonso had just got his head down and focused on his performance and not focused on Lewis, I think he'd have won that championship.
Yeah, I agree.
Like he should have done, because he was a two-time world champion and Lewis was a rookie. Lewis was epically fast and did great overtakes. But I still think over the course of the season, the experience of Fernando Alonso, and if he'd actually taken up the helm as a leader, would have pushed them forward to win that championship. And then the whole of history could have been rewritten, because he had left McLaren.
And Tom brings up an interesting point in the chat, and this is one that I definitely wanted to get onto, because there was this period where Hamilton and Alonso seemed to patch things up. So when Alonso left McLaren and he went for those couple of years at Renault, it seemed like they actually became almost friends, despite everything that had gone before. Almost like they both felt a bit wronged by McLaren, and they were always complimenting each other. Tom says, interesting to see this happen. When Vettel was winning, Lewis and Fernando were saying each other were the best regularly, and I remember that too. And so I thought they were actually kind of friends, but more recently, that seems to have gone completely the other way. Fernando seems to be like fully Team Max, and is congratulating him at every opportunity. And yeah, the animosity has boiled to the surface, culminating in Hamilton replying to I don't know, I can't remember what was the tweet. Was it? He didn't actually reply to anything specific. It was a thumbs up with a photo of Hamilton on the podium above Alonso with his hand patronisingly on his shoulder. Was that from Indianapolis 2007?
Yes, it was. It was. And I'm not saying I know that because I know their podium. I'd love to claim that. I just knew that.
So normally, Hamilton doesn't respond. Or in modern Hamilton of the past would tweet your data. He didn't care. Hamilton would tweet anything out in the past.
God, remember that.
Like, Hamilton of the modern era is kind of
media savvy.
Reserved, media savvy. Yeah, and he doesn't rise to things because I guess he doesn't feel he needs to most of the time. But this one he couldn't hold back. As with the what was the comment earlier this year where he said, it was like a real sassy comment on Twitter where he said, yeah, that would be, wouldn't it? It was in response to something. Someone in the chat will remind us. It's the second time this year Hamilton has responded, but subtly and with very minimal words. And this time it was just a thumbs up, I think, with that photo. So, I
mean, listen, he was. That's all he needed to say was just, yeah, okay, mate, whatever, sure. It was one of those things. But it's like it kind of, I think, resurfaced at Hungary last year, when Lewis was coming back through the field after the craziest race I can remember for a start. And he was holding... listen, Alonso was defending his teammate. And for the majority of that race where he was holding up Lewis to protect Ocon, because if he hadn't held Lewis up for what I think was 6-10 laps, Lewis would have won that race. So Alonso helped Ocon win that race. But then afterwards, in the interview, he said, well, I had to do it for Ocon and also for Max.
Yes, I remember that.
Why are you getting involved? You're not involved in this championship. Why are you getting involved?
So the chat haven't let us down, and they have reminded me what that other tweet was about, and it was back with the racism from Nelson Piquet Sr. Someone tweeted something along the lines of, wouldn't it be brilliant if Lewis Hamilton just replied with, or it said, imagine if Lewis Hamilton replied with, who the F is Nelson Piquet? And Hamilton quote tweeted it and said, imagine. That was it. I'm pretty sure that was it. So anyway, there we go. That was the second bit of sass. So speaking of sass, you are a nerd, Lastronomy, for remembering that. Speaking of sass, how sassy was Daniel Ricciardo's move down the inside of Yuki Tsunoda at Mexico? We've got a picture of that on the screen right now. For those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see an AlphaTauri with two wheels off the floor and a McLaren underneath it with Ricciardo on full lock to the right. There were a couple of controversial moves at Mexico, both of them penalised. One from Pierre Gasly, where he forced Lance Stroll off, and one from Daniel Ricciardo, where he seemingly mistakenly forced Yuki Tsunoda into the wall or into the air. What do we think about both of these? You know my opinions, I think, Alex, but let's start with you. Should we go with the Gasly one first? Because that happened first. What's your race driver opinion on the Gasly versus Stroll incident? And I know you're not a Lance Stroll fan.
I'm not a Lance Stroll fan. I'm not particularly bothered about Gasly either. So, but this one seems a bit of a carbon copy of what Max did to Lewis at Abu Dhabi on lap 1 last year, where he just launched it down the inside, didn't make the apex, ran himself off the track, and then in turn ran Lewis off the circuit. And that's exactly what Pierre's done here. But there was no escape road for Lance to take, so he couldn't just cut across. I think there's loads of grass there, so it wouldn't have made sense for him to cut across the grass there and keep his position. And yes, Gasly deserved the penalty he got for that. It was 5 seconds. But my issue with it is that he kept the position and then just disappeared off into the distance. So they can give him a 5-second penalty, and it meant nothing to him because it's like, well, I've already made the move, I'm already ahead, and I can pull away from Lance Stroll. What they should have done was make him give the place back. And I'd have been happy just with that. not even giving him a time penalty, just to say, right, Gasly, you got to drop off, you got to back off and let Stroll through. That would have been better than any form of penalty.
And I'm in full agreement with you there. We've got people in the chat saying F1 public lobby move. Aaron Larg says Gasly should have had to give the place back immediately. And I have to agree, because the problem, as you've pointed out, the problem with this kind of penalty, especially just a 5-second, is that if you're being held up significantly by the car ahead, there's no incentive not to just illegally pass them and just pull away, because you'll, as Gasly did, you'll just make 5 seconds, it's fine. And we saw with Ricciardo later on that, and actually I just want to circle back, you compared that move with Gasly to what Verstappen did at the first lap of Abu Dhabi last year. This was way worse. Verstappen kept his own car on the track. There wouldn't have been any room for Hamilton to exist if Hamilton hadn't cut the corner. Verstappen went right up to the edge of the track.
But Gasly also went off.
Gasly went all 4 wheels off the track. Gasly did.
And isn't that what the penalty
Brazil
was for?
Yes, that's right.
That penalty was for overtaking off the circuit.
Yes, that's correct.
Which is ridiculous.
I mean,
it's a complete wrong penalty.
Yeah.
But they've done this a lot this season, haven't they? There's been an incident where you could give a multitude of penalties, and they've given the entirely wrong penalty. I'm struggling to think for an instant of it.
It's because there's too many. The stewards are pants in a lot of situations. I
can think of worse words.
Yes, I'm being really nice. So that's obviously, I mean, maybe from their list of penalties they're allowed to give, maybe that's just the one that has to be given because of precedent set by other rubbish stewards in the past. But it's basically ineffective. We've already pointed out the flaws. And another one that had a flawed penalty, although flawed outcome if you believe the penalty was given correctly, was Daniel Ricciardo versus Yuki Tsunoda. Someone in the chat here wrote that he sent it, but the postbox was decommissioned decades ago. Thanks to Connor Edwards for that.
See, I don't think it was that bad. Now, I didn't get to watch the race properly live because I was at a party. And I was watching it on my phone while being nudged by Lauren, my wife telling me to turn it off and focus on the party and maybe some speeches that were going on. And I saw it as, I think Yuki could have given Danny more room. And then I watched it on the highlights before. And what you've got Danny Rick, who's just come out the pits on fresh softs. Yuki was on hards.
I don't know. Don't ask me what tyres Yuki Tsunoda was on hards.
Either way, he was on an older, harder tyre. And as we saw for the rest of the race, Danny scythed his way through the entire field. Yuki's gone a little bit deep into the left-hander where Gasly showed Stroll off the circuit. And Danny's gone very, very tight into that corner to give himself an overlap, to come back through the right-hander underneath Yuki Tsunoda. Now, if I was Yuki Tsunoda in that instant, and I didn't want to lose my place, I would have moved my car half a car width to the right to say, right, you're not coming past, don't even try it here. But he stayed fully over to the left-hand side of the track, allowing the much faster car to have a look up to the inside. And as Danny has gone into the corner, I think he's got a rear wing in line with Yuki's wheel. Yuki should have seen that. I'm not taking any of the whole thing of he was in my blind spot. If someone's attacking you, you know they're there. And Yuki could have just given him the tiniest bit of space. They wouldn't have had contact. He could have slowed Danny on the exit and would have held the position anyway. But he invited Danny to have a look. And we all know Danny Rick well enough. If you invite Danny to have a look, he's going for it.
So here's my view. So first of all, we need to point out Alex Van Gien is a famous Daniel Ricciardo fan. So he's going to be wildly biased towards Ricciardo's side here.
He's my bestie in everything.
After they spent some time together at the Race of Champions, and Alex kept pestering him to film stuff on his phone, and Ricciardo was good enough to.
I asked him nicely once and said he didn't have to. Did it?
Yeah,
he was a lovely man.
He was a good guy. And I also myself have met Daniel Ricciardo on several occasions and spent many an hour with him. Sat in a race car, and he was also a very, very nice guy.
You instructed him, didn't you?
Yeah, long story. Maybe we'll get onto that next time if people are interested. But yeah, so I actually took a very similar view to you on this. I don't believe it was Tsunoda's fault as such, but I was watching this unfold, and I thought what was going to happen was exactly what happened. So Tsunoda, I appreciate, he's got other things on his mind. He's probably like driving the car and looking in front of him and that kind of thing. But he knew Ricciardo was there because he'd already defended from him once. So he knew Ricciardo was in very close proximity, striking distance. And as you pointed out, it kind of looked like he invited a move. He stayed all the way left. He didn't even wander to the middle of the track before that right-hander. So it always looked to me like Ricciardo was going to at least probe. He was going to have a look and then see what happened. I think as it happened, he maybe overcommitted, and Tsunoda turned in anyway. What Ricciardo was hoping would happen was he'd use that gap that was available, and Tsunoda would think, oh, whoa, there's a car coming down my inside. I'll give a bit more room than normal. And they'd both get through like that. I think that's how it was supposed to play out. It didn't. However, the draconian 10-second penalty that Ricciardo was given didn't matter because he pulled away more. I think it was 11 seconds anyway, and managed to stay best of the rest. Daniel Ricciardo was the best non-Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes. So all I can think is Tsunoda maybe thought, it's Ricciardo behind me. I must have just lapped him, based on this year's form.
See, the other thing as well with that is it's all well and good to shout that it's somebody else's fault while you're buried in the wall and damaged a car and are out of the race. Sometimes you do have to think about self-preservation. And I think we've seen Stroll do this in certain circumstances.
Easy for you to say.
Exactly. We've seen Stroll do this where he's just turned in on somebody who's there because he feels he has a right to the corner. He may have had a point, but he's crying from outside his car because he's been hit. Sometimes you have to have a bit of self-preservation. And it's not like there wasn't space to the left of Yuki where he could have survived because there's more track, a bit of tarmac runoff, and then the barrier.
So Ivan points out in the chat, it's a dead angle in the mirror. I think he means he's in the blind spot. However, I counter that by saying that if you know you're fighting a car, and you haven't seen him spin off into the barriers, so he's probably still there somewhere, and you've lost sight of that car, it's kind of at least partially on you to leave even more room because they might be there. If you have a blind spot, and F1, we know Formula 1 cars, they really have poor visibility with these mirrors. We're getting massive mirrors next year, but at the moment at least they've got terrible visibility in battles, especially when they're wobbling around. If a car was there and he suddenly vanished, it's probably in the place you can't see, so maybe just leave a bit more room there. That's the one counter to that.
Yeah, I mean, I do this in, and I assume you probably do as well, Brad, I do this in sim racing a lot. I think a really good example is coming into the last 1, 2, 3 corners at Silverstone, where you go through Stowe and then you've got a tight 90-degree left-hander followed by a right-hander and another right-hander. And if you go to take somebody around up the inside of that first left-hander, they are still able to hang it around the outside and get up the inside of you into the right. You can't see them once you're sort of 3/4 of a car length. But because you've just gone past them, you know that they're there. So it's never sensible to close that door because they might be hanging a wheel in, they might be hanging a front wing in. And it's just a surefire way to guarantee you're not going to have an accident by just giving a little bit more space than you really, really want to. Just to survive. Just
building a little bit of margin. But exactly. I still wouldn't say that it was Tsunoda's fault. I thought it was a racing incident, but I definitely thought the 10 seconds was quite a big penalty, and I really didn't think at the time that Ricciardo was going to be able to recover from that and make that gap. But it just shows how good that medium to soft strategy was, and that's what Mercedes really should have done. So Alex, your wife is in the chat, so you can't pretend that you're working hard up in Wakefield anymore. We're just playing.
Hello, darling. I do miss you. I do miss you. I've been away all week, and I'm not going. Do miss you.
If anyone else's wife wants to join the chat, we want as many people chatting as possible. So encourage them all to join in. So that's it for our prescribed topics that we were going to talk about. We've tried to pick up some of the things in the chat that people have been mentioning. One thing we haven't spoken about, probably because it's not that exciting, is that Haas have a big sponsor for next year. So they have MoneyGram. What's MoneyGram, Alex? Do you know what that is? Is it like a cash transfer app?
Someone has just said, is it owned by William Storey? That can't be right.
No, I think that's just a joke because...
Is that someone joking? I hope that's it.
Because Haas can't escape Rich Energy and they're coming back just with a new name. They're now called MoneyGram and it's still just a little bearded man.
Well, as we're talking about Haas, and we've been talking about Daniel Ricciardo, I mean, if I was Daniel Ricciardo, straight after that Grand Prix, I would have been on the phone to Gunther Steiner going, give me that last seat. Because there's pretty much guaranteed Schumacher's out. And it looks like they're going to go back to Hulk. And I like Nico Hulkenberg. I've not got nothing against him. But Nico Hulkenberg, who's been out the sport, hasn't actually had a proper drive for 2 years, apart from a couple of cameo appearances, versus Daniel Ricciardo, who's a proven race winner even in the last 2 years, despite the difficulties that he's had at McLaren. I don't want to lose Daniel Ricciardo from the grid because I think he's a great talent. And yes, of course, I'm a fan. But I think he'd also be a great someone else to go up against K-Mag.
So I actually agree with you, and I wouldn't have done before Mexico because I really thought Ricciardo was washed up. And that might still be the case. I mean, Norris was still ahead of him throughout the weekend, and it was really only the tyre strategy that put Ricciardo in that position. But he did a very good job with that. So it's almost like there's still something there. He's still, in the right circumstances, maybe those circumstances are that you need to have much better tyres than everyone around you, but in the right circumstances, he can still pull out a performance. And I think he's snubbed Haas. I think he pretty much ruled them out from the outset. And from what I hear, he's going to be Mercedes' third driver next year. I don't know if that's the right way to go. I kind of feel like he would have been better just taking a race drive anywhere, even if it was IndyCar, you still keeping your hand in. We saw what happened to Magnussen. Magnussen was out for a year, did sports cars, one IndyCar race, got a deal with Peugeot to go and race at Le Mans, and then never fulfilled that because he came back with Haas. So teams do value experience nowadays. I just think Hulkenberg's experience, where he's been out of the car for a couple of years, and he wasn't a race winner or even podium finisher. Oh, I just did a Van Gene there. I just smacked my microphone. He wasn't one of those top guys anyway. Is Hulkenberg even like prime Hulkenberg? Is that really better than Mick Schumacher or Daniel Ricciardo?
Does he really want to extend to his longest amount of races without a podium? Because he still holds that record. And he is extending it every single race that he does, especially when he's doing a stand-in role. Again, I like Nico Hulkenberg. I think he's a nice guy. He's good to have on the grid. He's always a bit feisty. He's a good racer. He's generally safe, but he doesn't excite me. You know, he's had his time as far as I'm concerned, and I still think Daniel Ricciardo has much more to offer. One thing that I've spied with regards to Daniel Ricciardo in that McLaren, and we've talked about this, I think we might have even talked about it on other shows, but we've talked about the fact that when you see the pedal cam for the McLaren, it has a hell of a lot of travel for the brake pedal. And I was talking to somebody, the same person who I was talking to at Red Bull, because
the Red Bull spy.
Someone from McLaren has gone to Red Bull and they've talked about this. And it is very much to do with Daniel Ricciardo doesn't like the braking on the McLaren. It's not on the nose like he likes it, hence the reason he got on so well with the Red Bull where Max was doing very, very good. And the brake issue that they are having, or this brake travel that they have, is a hangover from back when, it's not down to Fernando, but back to when Fernando was with McLaren, of something that they were dealing with to help with the rotation of the car, which Daniel was just not accustomed to.
So I've seen this same footage of the brake pedal being super squishy by the looks of it on the McLaren. I don't know quite how much of that is just down to the camera angle because you're very close to it. Maybe it looks like it's moving further than it really is. But if that is just a trait of McLaren's and they just, they build a lot of travel into their braking system and a driver didn't like that, it seems to me that's something that could be quite easily fixed. You just give it less travel. You just adjust it so it doesn't have that much. It seems strange that would be something that's baked into the car. that you can't
It seems
fix.
like it is something baked in. That's the problem.
I mean, and you'd think that other drivers would have complained too, because that is quite unusual for modern race cars. It's not really so unusual for a GT car or a touring car, but still pretty unusual. Any race car I've ever driven, like tin top race car, it's never had as much travel as that McLaren seems to have on the footage I've seen. And normally single-seaters or prototypes have even stiffer brake pedals, as you yourself have experienced when you've driven the corporate versions at Palmer Sport. So it's a weird one, isn't it? But you'd have thought Ricciardo would have mentioned that specifically if that was his issue.
It seems like he's been muted by the team. I mean, listen, I'm not saying if the car was exactly to Danny Rick's liking, he'd be beating Lando Norris. I still think Lando Norris has the potential to be a generational talent alongside Max, alongside Lewis, alongside George Russell, alongside Charles Leclerc. I think he is an amazing driver and one of the top 5 on the grid. And Danny is just below that. But there is a whole bunch of guys in the bottom half of this formula who I don't think could lace Daniel Ricciardo's boots.
So Connor Edwards says, I think Hülkenberg will come back, get a podium, and instantly retire. And that would be worth it. I don't mind losing Ricciardo for Hülkenberg to come back.
Has got to put in a blooming good car. Well, they are normally good at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, Hülkenberg has 2 races to get a lucky podium. And then Haas will inexplicably drop off the development path and be terrible for the rest of the season and fall back to their customary back of the grid position. And Alex has answered in the chat as well. For anyone on Twitter who doesn't know, Alex Van Gien does have Dutch origins. That's why we have him on. So we've got a real balanced conversation when we're talking about Verstappen. I'm the one that's not so much of a fan. Van Gien, obviously
Super
with Dutch heritage, gives us that balance that we require in the conversations about Red Bull and Max. So just before we finish then, let's give it one more question, because Built Tujas Lexus, and I'm going to keep pronouncing it like that until I'm told otherwise, asks, what seat is actually worth having in 2024? If Daniel takes a year out, he's a Mercedes reserve, whatever, and he builds his own confidence back up, but he also builds externally everyone else's confidence in him back up somehow. Maybe they just forget how rubbish he's been for the last couple of years, apart from like the odd sporadic good performance, and he potentially has a way back to the grid in 2024. What seats are available or potentially available, and what's actually worth having? I know it's a big ask to know that this far ahead, but the car development's probably not going to be wildly different. You know, the best teams are still going to be the best teams. So
let's do a process of elimination. It's not going to be Red Bull. I think Red Bull are very happy with Max and Perez backing Max up. It's not going to be Mercedes because Lewis has said that he's hanging around, and obviously George has a decent length deal. Same thing with the Ferrari boys. I don't think either of those are going anywhere. McLaren are going to keep Lando and have just signed Oscar Piastri. AlphaTauri, he's not going to go back into the Red Bull fold. So that leaves Aston Martin, Haas, Williams, which I don't, unless Williams have some sort of resurgence, I don't see him wanting to go to Williams. Who am I missing?
Have you not covered them all?
Is that all of them? That might be all of them.
I was reading the chat. I wasn't paying attention to anything you were saying.
So I think Aston, Haas, potentially Williams. I feel like I'm missing.
Is the one you missed McLaren? Because he's obviously not going.
No, Alfa Romeo.
So
that's what I'm missing. So
Bottas isn't nailed on at Alfa Romeo / Sauber / Audi, depending on which year in the next few years we're talking. Fernando Alonso, again, isn't necessarily going to stay there forever. He is by far the oldest driver on the grid. Alpine is the one you missed.
He's not going there either.
Well, you never know. The Gasly-Ocon fallout could be horrendous. You know, they are quite similar drivers who are going to probably be occupying quite a similar part of the grid and
they've got a history,
rivalry, a history. Even if they say they're over it now, there could be some fireworks at Alpine. I was really glad Gasly got that seat, but I'm not sure it's a very sensible choice. And yeah, so I think there are potential openings at teams which are worth driving for. So Aston Martin, Audi / Sauber, Alfa Romeo, or Haas. There could be opportunities at any of those. So maybe it's not the weirdest thing in the world for Ricciardo to sit out a year, let his confidence build. The only problem is he won't be... When you're out of the car, you're not getting faster, are you? You don't get quicker by not driving the car. So when he's already struggled with this breed of cars, being out of them, I think you do tend to get left behind, which is why I find it so strange that Hülkenberg's coming back. Because you think older, harder to learn stuff when you're older, and this is a big change from what he's driven before. And yeah,
I'm not certain what Hulk's been doing while he's been sat on the sideline.
He's been Aston Martin reserve, and
he's not been racing anything.
Really, no, he hasn't been racing anything. He's just been at
and that's why I don't think Danny going to a third driver role is worthwhile, because he'll have to be at all the races. So he'll just be sat there on the sidelines drinking coffee and reading data. If he was going to take some time out, he should go to IndyCar, because at least he's driving something fast. He'll get some oval experience, and they do road courses.
And it would be good for us to see. It'd be exciting for us to watch. I've watched all the IndyCar races that I've been around
and he loves
for
America.
This year. Yeah, I was surprised he didn't choose that. If anyone lost us on YouTube for a moment there, I did just get a little pop-up message saying OBS disconnected and then OBS reconnected. So apologies if you lost us. I don't know whether you did. Everything seemed to carry on working. The computer just told me it wasn't. Everyone on Twitter will remain unaffected. And once again, thanks for joining us on Twitter. You can head over to the YouTube channel and join in with the chat there. I know we said we're going to do one more question. I've just seen another one which I want to answer, so I think we will take one more, even though this isn't a super chat. Only the super chats are the real questions. This is, who is the best driver, in our opinion, outside of Formula 1? Aside from Alex Van Gien.
Oh, it's you, darling. You. I don't follow too much outside F1. There's lots of murmurings about different people. I think F2's been a bit meh this year. I don't think there's too much going on there. There's lots of talk of a guy in IndyCar who's linked to McLaren, who was on track.
Which one? There's so many.
Palou?
Yes, Alex Palou. Yeah, okay.
He was it. Which track did he come and do
He was at COTA being.
It was COTA, and he loved it. He was actually quite quick as well. So maybe it's him, but it's so hard to tell from different formulas on who does well. Sebastian Bourdais back in the day was a 3-time NASCAR, IndyCar, Champ Car champion. Argued to be one of the best people outside F1. Came into F1 and absolutely flopped. So, it's really, really hard to tell.
So we've had a suggestion in the chat from Aaron, and I'm not sure if it's Larg or Largu, but sorry, Aaron, who says Kalle Rovanperä is the only answer. I can only assume that is a Scandinavian rally driver who we obviously wouldn't know anything about. Bill Tuges Lexus says Alex Palou is clearly above. Christopherson is quite the beast of a driver. I believe he's a rallycross driver, so we've got drivers coming in from different disciplines. I certainly don't think the best driver outside of F1 is someone in Formula 2 or Formula 3 on the way up. So I think you are looking over at IndyCar/Formula E. It's difficult without having a lot of time to really think about it. I think I tend to agree on the Alex Palou. And
you watch a lot more other series than I do.
Yeah, but I don't watch them and think, yeah, that driver's good enough to be in Formula 1 or better than... They're obviously very good at their own discipline. And I think if you stuck the majority of F1 drivers in a GT3 car or a touring car, they wouldn't be as quick as the regular drivers by a long way until they'd had enough practice to get used to it. It'd be such a weird departure from what they're used to. On this topic, Nicholas Latifi today on the... Is it Beyond the Grid?
He's not left yet.
Is it Beyond the Grid? Is that the F1 podcast?
Oh, was he on Beyond the Grid, was he?
Yeah, so he was. That was him today, I believe it was released, and he pretty strongly indicated he's looking at IndyCar for next year and that he would do the ovals. So I would be surprised if we don't see Latifi in IndyCar. Dave Jr. is proposing Brendan Hartley and someone else. Oh,
Brendan did an alright job when he came back, but he's not top tier.
So Brendan Hartley, raced in the British.
Colton Herter.
I was just going to say Brendan
Has been
Hartley
mentioned
racing
as
around
well.
of the British Rental Kart Championship, which is my series, a
He
long
did.
time ago in Cambridge, back before he was famous.
Oh my God, it was that was awful.
It was
That
a
track was
terrible track. I don't think it exists anymore, does it?
That track was horrendous and run by a terrible race director.
And we're getting other suggestions. GT drivers, Kevin Estra. Yeah, I mean, if we went through all the GT drivers, then you could name some phenomenal talents that you can't really compare to Formula One drivers because it's such a different discipline. So, I think we should probably leave it there, Alex. I think we've done our hour.
It's a good point to end on.
We've gone well over an hour, actually. Thanks for everyone on Twitter who joined us. Thanks for everyone in the YouTube stream.
Absolutely.
And thanks for Alex for committing to this one, despite being in a hotel room up north.
Yep. I've even had to take their telly off its stand and put it in front of me so that I could do this properly and add an HDMI cable to it.
So I'm going to massively disappoint our fan base now and say it's actually me that's going to let the side down for the next 2 weeks. We tried to work around this. This isn't pod fade. First of all, because it's not a podcast. Secondly, because we're not just giving up so we can't be bothered. I'm going to be in France for the next 2 weeks, and I cannot do this podcast. No, not a podcast. I cannot do this show without...
He's not listening, it's fine.
I can't do it without a computer. And my work laptop is the only laptop I have, and I can't install things on it. So it's just impossible for me to run this. Can't do it through my phone. And so unfortunately, there's just...
So if somebody wants to send Brad a laptop with OBS and Discord on it, it will be greatly appreciated.
But we will be back in 3 weeks, which will be after the Brazilian Grand Prix. On our normal Wednesday night 10 p.m. slot to talk about the Brazilian Grand Prix. That won't be after Abu Dhabi, will it? This is going to be.
We're going to try and do the Twitter space, aren't we?
Ah, yes. Okay. Yeah. Well reminded. Yes. Yeah, so actually, all of you that are sticking with us on Twitter, we will probably do this as a Twitter space. We just won't have the regular YouTube shows. Yeah. So that's not a problem. We can do this like normal. Yep. On the Wednesday night on Twitter. So maybe we'll just get a bigger Twitter audience instead. So if you haven't already done a Twitter space, YouTube people, go on Twitter, get an account, and you'll see. It's easy. It'll pop up. Just go and like me and what is it on Twitter? I'm showing my age again. Subscribe, follow me. And
follow on Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube.
That's it. We're both non-blue tick peasants, like everyone else will be soon anyway.
You're much closer. You're nearly at 20k.
But that's nothing to do with blue tick. It's now just going to be about whether or not you pay the money, isn't it?
Oh, anyway, you got to pay for it, haven't you? Yeah, soon. I heard about that.
So thanks for joining us, everyone.
Elon.
Thanks for the super chats, and we'll see you on Twitter in a week, and we'll see you back on YouTube in 3 weeks' time.